This week, I posted on Twitter, Discord, and YouTube asking what you folks thought I should make. And the answers ranged from enemies to characters to UI and igloos. But before we get into the video, my name is Helper Wesley, I've made these games, and I make weekly devlogs. I started by expanding the 2 art packs to make room for all the art I was going to make this week. I had kind of high hopes. What I wanted to make was a bunch of weapons and tools that were in the same style as that guillotine/slicer thing that was already in the art pack. So I started with a pickaxe, just shaping it out to begin with to kind of get the feel for how it's supposed to look, and then afterwards adding in the detail, like I don't know if it's leather or wood on top. I think I used the more saturated brown colors, so I feel like that would be like a leather. I tried to give the handle a leather-wrapped kind of look to it, with these kind of diagonal pixels, but something just seemed wrong about it. It wasn't as nice and clear as the rope on the spear in the ice art pack. But since tools and weapons weren't really something that people were asking for, I decided to just drop that, and move on to something that was asked for. This person,
Milan Zuiderveld,
wanted me to add crystals to the art pack, which was actually a really good idea. Crystals are one of those things that can be used in a lot of ways. The trouble is, though, I'm not an artist. Just ignore everything you're seeing on screen right now, because I'm not. I'm really not. I try, but I'm not. So, what happened was, I tried over and over and over and over and over again with different shapes and shading styles, and I looked up references and tutorials and all that kind of stuff. But eventually what I ended up with was this. I shared that on the Discord and on Twitter, and people seemed to think it was okay. But in my head it wasn't realistic enough. It's all very saturated, but it's also still kind of in the realm of reality. So I tried to make a more realistic hunk of crystal. Like these geometric shapes you see, a lot of gems and things are cut that way. Some do form naturally, but you're more likely to find giant chunks of jagged-edged, rock-shaped crystals, if that makes sense. So I ended up with this, and I do sort of like these, and so, in true Helper Wesley fashion, I just put both of them in the art pack, and you guys can pick whichever one you like. I even made different color versions of them, so hopefully that's something people can use in some way. I then moved on to an igloo for the ice pack, as suggested by
Sid Fish Games.
I don't know exactly why I thought this would be something I could tackle, because I've never done any kind of buildings or things, but I'm Canadian, and we all live in igloos, so I really shouldn't have any trouble doing this. And so I cut out some blocks and laid them in place and copied and pasted them to make this brickwork wall, and then used the erase tool to cut it all out and turn it into a semicircle. And I made the doorway into this I feel like if I changed the colors into red and fleshy tones, it would look like a portal into hell or something. But it's totally just a regular entrance into a regular igloo. I will say though, sadly, I did end up throwing this out. I played with it some more and changed the shading here and there, and I just couldn't really get what I wanted out of it. And I didn't want to just throw it into the pack because I put time into it. I wanted to throw it in there because people would actually want to use it. So I tossed that out, but I did leave the door in there just in case somebody wanted to use it for something. I then moved on to a character, as suggested by
a bunch of people.
I then went through a bunch of shapes to kind of feel out how I wanted the character to look. Did I want the character to be cartoony, or cute, or just a blob, or something? I definitely didn't want it to be human because humans with all their limbs and moving parts are really intimidating. But after cycling through a bunch of different shapes and things, I realized that they all would just not make sense in this art pack. So I drew a human. I have an obsession with the image of a traveling merchant or adventurer with their giant backpack on. And I'll admit, I'm a little bit chubby. So I made a chubby adventurer/traveling merchant with a giant backpack on. I gave the character knee pads and a buckler thing on their wrist. but I gave them those two things to help kind of define where the body parts are in motion. When I go to give this an animation, you'll hopefully be able to tell that it's his right knee being raised, because you can see the knee pad popping out in front of him. And yes, I'm saying that I'm so lacking in talent that I'm making precautionary moves to cover up the fact that I don't know what I'm doing. But following some tutorials, I got a walking animation working. And I originally thought of having the backpack sway back and forth, but that would have been a lot of work. So instead, I'm just gonna have it bouncing. I had the basics of a walk cycle planned out, but it was getting really late, so I went to bed. And overnight, I thought about it and realized that the character has a big backpack on, so if you or I were to walk, we would be holding onto the straps of the backpack, so it's not bouncing around. And so I went back in after and put their hands where the straps would be, giving it a little bounce as the animation loops. And this actually saves me some effort because all I would have to focus on would be the legs. I got the basics kind of drawn out and started shaping out the legs and arms and body to feel how things would be moving around. And I posted this on the Discord, and as usual, they came to my rescue, and thank you so much for your advice and your comments and things. It's really a blessing to have you folks there and to be able to learn from you. Specifically one kind soul who described themselves as an old animator, who sent me a link that I'm putting down below that broke down how a walking cycle works for a character. Now, this thing is 8 frames long, and people in the Discord were suggesting to make it 8 frames long. I don't know why, but I really held on to it being 4 frames. So what I did was steal every second frame in the animation, examining how the feet work and applying that to my animation. And once I got that done, it was time to fill in with color. And this is why I really like shaping things and then filling it in with color, because I did have to tweak some things here and there, but ultimately it was just a matter of filling it in, adding some shading, and done. Now, this is by no means perfect. This is literally my first attempt at trying to animate a fully realized character. The only other animations I've done were for Subway Hell, where I animated silhouettes. And even then, they were just small loops of characters doing like benign things like stomping on cigarettes or turning around or stuff like that. Not like a proper full walk cycle. So to finish out what I wanted to get done for this character would have taken forever. So instead, I made an idle animation and a sitting pose. And when I made the sitting pose, I stopped and thought about how great it would be to make some Twitter clickbait fodder. Something pretty for Twitter to kind of like look at and... Oh, speaking of which, if you wouldn't mind doing me a favor, could you click on that like button? I do occasionally make videos on marketing, because after you make a great game, the second thing you have to do is then make people aware that the game exists. And so I'm really curious what it would do to the, YouTube algorithm if everybody that watched this video liked it. Where were we? Right, Twitter fodder. Something pretty to show on Twitter for people to like. I really wanted to rip off the sitting by the fire scene from Shovel Knight, and so I tried to draw a tree, and I spent a lot of time on this tree. And then I threw out that tree. So instead I decided to just put it in the castle, but I had to draw a fire for that. And fire I find is really easy to do because it doesn't have a set form like a rigid body does. Like when a character moves, then the limbs have to move in like a realistic way and it has to make sense. But fire jumps around and does weird things anyways. You just have to make sure that the last frame matches with the next frame and then they all loop. Otherwise, you can do whatever you want with fire. You just need to make sure that you shade it in a way that makes sense. Now, these aren't really the best colors for a flame, but they're what's in the color palette that I was using, so I just rolled with it. I then put those things together into like a little isolated scene that I could make pretty. So you've got a background layer with a dark layer in front of that, and then you have a mid-ground layer where the player and the scene is, and then you have a dark layer in front of all of that. And basically all I did was delete circles from each layer based on how big the flame is at that time, and that in itself would have looked nice, but Brainiac here decided I would take it one step further and trace out the bricks where the light would be kind of like penetrating into the bricks a little bit and then being, God, you see it on screen. It looks nice, it really does, but the difference that little bit of polish made was not enough for the amount of time that I spent on it. And I can't even like use this for something else, so hopefully watching me do it taught you something, because otherwise this really doesn't have any other value other than looking pretty. which is good. It's good to make nice looking things when you're making art. But like, I don't know. So because I basically ran out of time doing all of this stuff, I decided to give the ice pack the little robot rolling character that I designed for the prototype I made, which is kind of cheating. It's like holding back art and then giving it to you and being like, hey, look at this new thing I gave you. But it's there now, and I personally think this robot's really cute. And I would be interested to see who could make that character work in a game they're making. So yeah, if you like the video, click on that subscribe button. The links to the places that I hang out are down below, and if you decide to click on one, then I'll see you there.